Welcome back to the Y.E.S Longevity Lab podcast, where we give you insight on how to get fit, feel younger, and live better. I have just a little housekeeping here to start with. Number one, this is our last week of our New Year contest, so make sure everybody gets their body weight Wednesday morning to Saturday morning. If you don't get it in, we will be disqualified, so make sure that happens. And we are starting our next Fit 42 April 15th. If you want some information on Fit 42, you're welcome to go to our Fit 42 Facebook page. You'll get all kinds of information there. We have some podcasts, videos on that, so you're welcome to take a look at that. So today, we have one of my good friends, part of our Salts Fitness University mastermind, Danny Twoguns. We'll call him Danny Twoguns. Thanks for coming on board with us today, Dan.
My pleasure.
And before we go any further, let me just give you a little idea who Danny Twoguns is, okay? He's been in the fitness industry since 2006. He opened his first location, Twoguns Training Systems, in Erie, Pennsylvania. That's a brick-and-mortar location back in 2013. Since then, he has opened a second location, Moving Forever Fitness, for a little old clientele like ourselves. And he also has the Fitness Nerd Academy, which is continuing education and marketing agency for fitness professionals. I highly recommend that. Danny's been critical in my development in my Facebook marketing. As we know, I hate Facebook.
Love technology, right?
And I love technology. You guys don't realize today I have an echo on my ear. Everything I say is echoing. A few things about Danny. He's got his bachelor's degree in health and physical education and performance. He has over 20 certifications, including he is a DVRT Master Instructor, a Kinstretch affiliate, a PRI nerd, and he is the author of the #1 best-selling book, Get With the Program. So he is certainly well educated in the fitness industry. Actually, he is constantly going to continue education. No, you're not, sir.
What was that? You broke up.
I would say that it is one of your passions, continuing education.
Just a small one, yeah, or the big one, right?
He spent more on continuing education than I do on rent.
That might be true.
So I brought Danny on board today because he is a DVRT Master Instructor. And first, we're going to have Danny explain what DVRT, because people see us do videos and we're using these sandbags, and what is that all about? So what is DVRT?
So on the top level surface, DVRT stands for Dynamic Variable Resistance Training. The fitness industry loves acronyms, but in essence, it's a foundation and a philosophy based around the ability to progress, make harder, or regress, make easier exercises and variations without simply relying on load. Because one of the downfalls of simply adding or decreasing load as a way to make things easier or harder is that, number one, it assumes that you already can do the variation. Like, oh, what if I can't squat? Well, just go lighter. And I was like, well, no, what if I can't squat? Right? So when it's just load, you have to assume that the person can actually do it, which most of the time they simply can't. And then also with load, in increasing weight, at some point you're going to hit a ceiling, and we can't just keep adding more weight, right? Because what happens when you reach a certain weight? No, just go heavier, make it harder. Well, you can't do that. So with DVRT, what we actually find is not only are there multiple ways to make an exercise more challenging and more effective, but actually load is one of the least effective ways to progress or regress exercises. So now we have this foundational look at our program design that allows us to completely individualize the progressing of the exercise to the individual who's in front of us. And that, in a nutshell, that's what it is.
So what would you say the DVRT philosophy is? What sets it apart?
Well, and I think it's kind of echoing those same sentiments, right? Because, historically, like I mentioned, adding weight lowering weight, but also the barbell was the thing that people looked for as the main implement they were using. And the barbell is actually one of the only implements where you load it in micro loads anyway, right? And it's also one of the exercises where it kind of locks you into ranges of motion that most people can't do, which is why most people could do a deadlift with a kettlebell or a trap bar, but can't necessarily with a barbell, because the barbell is just cumbersome in certain pieces. So when we look at the philosophy, it comes down to a hyper individualized program design piece and exercise selection piece for it that is geared around getting people the safest, most effective results possible, and kind of revolutionizing the way we look at programming.
So give us some examples of ways to make the exercise more challenging without increasing the load.
So a kind of an easy example to make parallels is we use the squat pattern. Now, one of the faults and downfalls of a lot of things is that it assumes body weight is the easiest variation, right? Like, oh, a body weight squat, that's the easiest variation, which is far from true, because as we know, people don't move enough, they sit too much, and they've lost the ability to actually, whether it's reach those range of motions, stabilize or control those range of motions, or both of those, or a host of other things. So now with the squat, one of the things we look at is how can we actually assist the pattern of the squat. A common way is like a TRX for assistance, where they hold on to the suspension trainer and they use that for stability and leverage as they descend down. Now that's okay, but there's a lot of assistance there. So one of the DVRT principles is you have, and again, so DVRT is kind of synonymous with the ultimate sandbag, and the ultimate sandbag isn't necessarily universally like what DVRT is. DVRT can be used with multiple implements, body weight, barbells, kettlebells, whatever. But the sandbag, the ultimate sandbag, is one of the most versatile implements to use the system. So they kind of use synonymously. So with the ultimate sandbag, you can hold it, and it's called a press out squat, where you progressively press the ultimate sandbag out in front of you as you descend in a squat. So now it actually looks at, we're adding load, and even though it's only 5, 10, 15 pounds, but we're adding load to the squat, and we're actually assisting the pattern. So we've added actually weight to the exercise, and we've assisted the exercise. So a ultimate sandbag press out squat is actually easier than a bodyweight squat and allows people to stabilize the pattern. Now going the other way, how can we make the squat harder once we've kind of mastered the squat pattern itself? So we're assuming that we can squat safely, effectively, and pain-free. So now we're going to hold an implement. In terms of the ultimate sandbag language, they call it a bucket position, which you're holding the sandbag vertically and your hands are kind of like a bucket, and the bag is kind of, hands are between your legs, and you're descending there down into the squat. Now, a simple way to make that a little harder is to change either the way we hold the bag or the dimension of the bag, right? So if we go to a bigger sandbag, they do a bear hug where they're kind of holding it against it. Now there's a little more to stabilize, but it's still kind of helping you squat. From the bear hug, you can go to a front load position, which is holding it horizontally across your chest up here. And from there, now we haven't even changed the ultimate sandbag we're using or made it heavier. We've actually probably made it lighter, but since we're holding it in a position where we have to stabilize the squat pattern more, we've increased the challenge of the exercise. And then, so just honing in on the point that how you hold the implement you're using can progress the exercise. So with the ultimate sandbag, a shouldered squat is where the bag lies across your shoulder this way. And that's actually an extremely challenging squat variation. Whereas if, say, you're using a 40-pound ultimate sandbag for your front load squat, a 20 or a 30-pound ultimate sandbag on your shoulder in a shoulder squat is actually way harder to stabilize, because you have to resist the forces side to side and rotationally. So now we've actually decreased the weight and increase the challenge of the exercise. But obviously in between that, we don't want to make that big a jump. So what we could also do is change the way you stand, or the stance position, as you're doing the squat, right? Because if we have the squat, our feet are our squat width. If we add a stagger or a sprinter stance, where now our heel of our right foot our toe of our right foot is in line with the heel of our left foot, we still have the squat pattern, but now we've built a level of asymmetry and challenge to the squat by changing the way we stand. So two of the more common ways DVRT uses uses progressions is through the holding of the implement and the stance of which you're performing the exercise.
So you just went through 6 or 7 different variations to make the exercise more challenging, and we didn't even touch tempo. We didn't increase the weight, and that's the beauty of the DVRT system. So I remember a few years ago when I went out to a place and did my certification DVRT level 1 and level 2, and the simple press out squat was so amazing to me. I came back to my facility and used it on so many people that were having a problem with their squats, and it cleaned it up like that. Just incredibly cleaned up so easily. And another thing about that particular movement is before sometimes you press out a dumbbell or a plate or a medicine ball, and it would help somewhat. But by using that bag and grabbing it, and pulling that bag apart, talk to us a little bit about how we do that.
Well, because there's a lot of interesting things, because some of the exercises people are like, well, you can just use a dumbbell, you can just use a kettlebell, you can just use a plate. And, no one would argue that the kettlebell is not the best implement to do a kettlebell swing with. But when it comes to other variations, there's like, oh, we could just use this. But you notice, like, as soon as you hold a plate and you try to do a press out squat or a med ball, and you do the same thing, there's not as much assistance or as effective as the ultimate sandbag, primarily because when we have the sand as the major piece of it, when we're doing dynamic stuff, it plays a big factor. But say in the press out squat, it's pretty static. The sand isn't shifting a whole lot, but what does happen is the surface area and the way the bag is vertically gives you that leverage from the surface area of the bag, but also the way that you grab it and pull the bag apart is piece of the engagement that helps with the squat, because sometimes people don't have the mobility or the ability to move through a range of motion to perform the squat. But what also happens a lot, if not as much or more often, is that most people have the requisite pieces of movement, but they can't actually stabilize and control it. So being able to pull the bag apart, have that counterbalance of leverage that's unique to the implement, assist them as they're doing it, all of a sudden they are inherently able to engage and stabilize the pieces that allow them to perform that, because it wasn't that they couldn't get into the movement, it's that they couldn't stabilize and control the movement. So that gives them that counterbalance and that ability to control that range of motion. And all of a sudden we see bodyweight squats that looked unsafe to a certain point, and then all of a sudden we add actually 10, 15 pounds to it, and all of a sudden it looks like a perfect squat, right? And that's kind of one of the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the beauty of that sandbag in the system is it forces people to engage the muscles, engage and stabilize without them having to think about it. You don't tell them, like, give us an example of a core exercise where in the past you would say, okay, now engage your core, tighten your abs. But now with DVRT system, that isn't true. It just happens with our instruction, without even having to think about it.
One of the common things is people are like, well, how do you cue or coach a person into bracing their core?
Right.
Right. And the answer is usually make it so that they don't have to think about it. And now that's a simplification, right? But it still speaks to when we don't necessarily know how to perform this movement or stabilize this movement, being able to add external pieces of feedback that allow us to actually do that without thinking about it builds the pattern in us to be able to then do it. So a good example is, say, the core exercise. One of the foundational core exercises we do, we call it the ultimate sandbag tall kneel press out. So you're on 2 knees, knees under hips, hips under torso, head right, directly stacked over the torso. You have the ultimate sandbag vertical, just like we're doing that press out squat, and then you press it out in front of you and stabilize the core pattern. It's kind of the entry level to the plank. Now, most of the time, it looks simple and you're only using 10 or 15 pounds, so it looks like it should be easy. But what ends up happening is instead of pressing the bag out and controlling it, they actually push themselves away
Yeah.
and push the bag out, or the bag moves and their hips kind of go back, or their feet cave in. And there's all these things that happen because you can't actually do it. So one of the ways we initially start, especially with people who have a lot of mobility and the ability to go through range, but not a lot of motor control, the ability to control that range, we'll put a block between their middle of their thigh that they have to squeeze together, and then we'll put a band, a mini band, around the arches of their feet so that when their feet kind of want to collapse in, which causes a lot of hip compensation, they have to actively, without thinking about it, so reactively, go against the band. So now we're squeezing that block. We're not allowing the feet to cave in because we have the feedback around the band. And then we perform the press out. And all of a sudden, we have a core that's turned on and hips that stay and stabilize in the position they're meant to, but with performing the exercise without us being like, hey, crown your head to the ceiling, keep your butt tight, crack that walnut, brace your abs, squeeze. And they have no idea what we're talking about. So getting them to do it without thinking about it all of a sudden increases how effective the exercise is. Now, the goal there is to progressively take away those pieces of feedback. So the way we can make that harder is to take away one of those two and just use the one. And then the way we can make it challenging even further is to have both of them taken away. And we're just doing the regular exercise, but now they can perform it correctly and efficiently without having to brace and arch and squeeze and crown and think about all these things, because they're innately subconsciously able to do it because we've developed that pattern via addressing like kind of those weak points without having to say 1,000 things to them. Because sometimes the best cue is to say nothing, but give them the tools and the ability to do it without you saying anything.
Very well said. People don't understand sometimes why we give these little implements and we tell them to pull the bag hard or hold it in this position. They have no idea that subconsciously this is what's going to happen in the body, and actually you're going to perform the exercise better. What's going to happen is what we want to have happen.
Well, because even with like the press out squat, you can hold the bag lightly and just kind of fling it out there, and it doesn't. But if you really crush a bag, you focus on pushing it as you focus on pulling it, and all of a sudden magic happens because they were able to engage things and they didn't necessarily know. Because it's actually surprising, especially with like the tall nail press out, because people see it and they're like, oh, that looks easy. And I'm like, just do it first, right? But then they do it and they're like, you know, when I was doing it, I did not feel what I'm feeling right now, where they're like my abs, and like my abs are on my sides. And I'm like, your abs are a cylinder. It's not just the front. But it allows them to actually know those things without having to like, hey, activate your transverse abdominis. My who, what? Like, they don't know. They don't care. They don't need to know, right? But just like, they didn't know it works, right? That's it.
The half of the fitness guys don't know what that is.
Well, that's another problem. That's for another podcast, right?
So, explain to my viewers why, when we do, for example, another great core exercise, double leg hip bridge or single leg hip bridge, why we pull the bag apart, how that engages the core without them even realizing it.
So one of the lines Josh Henkin, creator of DVRT and the Ultimate Sandbag, typically says is, what's the most popular exercise people do? Two answers that typically happen are squat or deadlift / hinge.
Right.
And those may be the most popular exercises performed in the gym, but the most popular exercise people perform in life is gait, aka walking. Right. There's no other exercise. And actually, gait's a pretty complicated exercise, right? Because it's actually multiplanar. There's a lot of things going on, and most people don't do that incredibly well. But that's another podcast, right? But gait and walking is the most popular exercise we do, and we don't typically train it nearly often enough in the gym as per what we look at when we see traditional fitness. Now, the act of gait is what fancy reciprocal, or aka alternating movement of the hips and shoulders, and then by proxy the lats, the big muscles on the backside of us, and the glutes. So we connect the shoulders and hips, which is connecting the lat and the glutes. And in that alternating connection, we have this three-dimensional core movement that is known as walking. And just because it looks simple doesn't mean it's simple. So from that philosophy and the principle, we know that the connection of the lat and the glute, right? So if we're walking correctly, when our right leg is forward, our left arm is forward. And then when we transfer and our right arm is forward, our left leg is forward. And then we alternate those. So the lats and the glutes, the upper body and the lower body are connected and typically only work together. Outside of a bodybuilding stage or a figure competition stage, those muscles do not work in isolation. They don't work alone. They are completely married in all of our movements. So everything we do has an element of the upper body and the lower body, or the lats and the glutes, connected. So one of the things, whenever we're doing, say, a lower body movement, which will be the double leg bridge that you're talking about, if we don't have the hands doing anything, the glutes and the hips are working in isolation, and they don't work that way anywhere except the bodybuilding stage or the thing we're doing there. So with the ultimate sandbag, the first thing we're doing there is we are doing that engagement piece. We are able to pull the bag apart, which then stabilizes the core from that feedback activation thing we just talked about. But what it also does, it connects the upper body and the lower body, the lats and the glutes, to work the way they are intended to work, which is together. And so, again, we look at, there are benefits of simply pulling the bag apart in itself, right? Even without a hip bridge. But when you connect it with a hip bridge, now the upper body and the lower body talk to each other. And when the upper body, lower body, the lats and the glutes talk to each other, the core can do core things like it's supposed to, which is the way it's meant to work.
So without using that really overused term, we're allowing the body to move the way it's designed to move and do functional training, the way the body is truly meant to move.
Well, because like functional training, right? We can go down a rabbit hole as to what that means.
That is 3 podcasts.
Right? Well, there's more than that, right? But when we look at to serve a function, right? Because one of the things people talk about, when you actually take a fitness and exercise approach that's built on making you move better as a human, as per humans are meant to move, you are able to move better. When you're able to move better, you move better, feel better, perform better, and you have more energy, right? So when we take this approach that's built on addressing your body as the way the body is meant to move, the only thing you could really define it as is function, right? Because your body and your brain function better, more efficiently, and when they function better and more efficiently, whatever goal you want can be at your disposal. Because when we look at goals, people tend to look like the top of the pyramid, and they ignore the bottom piece here, where the bottom of that is addressing people's limitations, asymmetries, weaknesses, whatever, but it's building that capacity to move as a human so that we can then build the more segmental things on top of that. And that, we don't want to use that term, but just because people ruined the term, I don't want to not use it because people ruined it, right? But to serve a function, right? Because a lot of times the way people train in the gym actually decreases and hinders their function. And that's a whole nother podcast, right? Where the gym, the exercise, the workout stuff you do should build you up, empower you, make you feel better, move better, serve you and your myriad responsibilities and goals as optimally as possible, and in no way break you down, make you feel like expletive, and move worse. Right. So it should serve us. And so maybe instead of functional training, it's like servitude training. Like it should serve whatever we want to do better. Right.
You're going to trademark that? Servitude?
I think I already just put in the trademark. Like I already just did it as we were talking.
So this is why the DVRT philosophy is better, correct? Because it's how the body moves.
Yeah. It links the body in a way in which the body was meant to be linked, and then further individualizes it, because now how we make the exercise harder isn't reliant on something arbitrary. It's reliant on you, what you need, how you move, what your goals are, and everything in between, right? Because when we're not bound to this method and this hierarchy that someone made up somewhere, there's a lot of things we can do to make it unique to the person. One of the things we talk about in our gyms is that really the number one rule is that the answer to everything first lies in it's contextual to the client, right? Because what can they do? What can't they do? What do they want to accomplish? Like, what is their goal? And then what does it take to get them there? And how do all those things interplay with one another, right? Because a lot of times some trainers and fit pros, they can't actually answer why the client is doing this thing. Like, why are you using that implement? Right. And if ignorance is the answer, that's okay. We can get into the argument that like there's so much education now that ignorance is not an excuse. But if that's the level of awareness they have, that's okay, right? But a lot of times it's, well, because this one is better. And I'm like, that didn't answer the question, right? It just gave me semantics. Like, why are you saying it's better in the optimal choice for that client? And a lot of times they don't have it. And that's why and our mentor, Alan Cosgrove, I don't know who he stole this from, but he said it so often that I think it's his now. Methods are many, principles are few. Methods may change, but principles never do. So when we get wrapped up in methods, we lose the individuality and the context to the client, and we're founded, or we have a foundation in principles. It allows us to open up all these doors, because I'm not married to an exercise, an implement, a system, a thing. I am only married to what works uniquely best for the client in front of me. And in order to do that, I have to be well versed in all the things and know exactly why something is happening. Because is the Ultimate Sandbag an incredibly versatile implement? Yes, it serves a lot of purposes, but there's also a lot of uniqueness and nativity to that implement in general, where we're not going to do an Olympic clean with a sandbag. We'll do an Ultimate Sandbag clean with it, but for an Olympic clean, we're going to use a barbell. For a kettlebell swing, we're going to use a kettlebell. For a chop and lift, we're going to use a bar and a resistance, right? So when we look at what these, because one of the lines we typically say is a tool is just a tool is typically said by tools, right? Because a tool isn't just you squatting with a kettlebell, a barbell, a med ball, a sandbag. They're not the same. There's differences and unique context and nuances to the implement specifically that changes things. Because a barbell, you're either going to hold it on your back or on your collarbones in a front squat, or it's typically not a squat, right? And those are not necessarily the optimal ways to necessarily hold it, especially if you haven't necessarily trained the squat. So now we have to have, and again, I don't want to use tools in our toolbox. We have to have skills in our skill set, trademark, that we're able to then individualize to the client. Because when we know and are well versed in how movement works from a principle-based standpoint, we can address and serve the client as uniquely individualized to them, which then gets them the best results possible in the most safest manner possible, which I don't think anyone would argue. No, I'm not interested in that. I want the shit. I want the stuff that hurts me. Like, they don't say it with their words. Sometimes they say it with their actions, right? But most of the time, they're like, no, I don't want this unique, individualized experience that serves me the best. No, thank you. Right? We don't hear that often, right?
No, it's incredible how people will compare what you do, what I do in our coaching group, to what goes on in just a regular gym. They think, hey, just bring me around to show me some exercises. Let's do some curls. And it frustrates me. I know it frustrates you, but there's so much difference. There's so much goes into coaching a person correctly to get them to move correctly and get the results they're looking for. It's much more than just sitting on a machine and pressing out your legs.
Well, and so much so. And we're really only talking about this in the context of the exercises and the training. We're not even talking about this in the context of the coaching, the mindset, the motivation, and all of those things that go into it. Because the number one thing a fitness professional is a cheerleader. Right? They're not, we don't just rah, right? There has to be education. There has to be expertise. There has to be community and environment to which serves them the best. And then all the exercise stuff we talked about, but also all of the other things too that, the best exercise selection, the best programming in the world implemented poorly and coached poorly is still poor, right?
Right.
Whereas the mediocre program coached incredibly well will probably work better. In my world, I want the best programming, coach the best, right? And that's, I think it's missed in so many things. And it's, again, I think one of the issues is that our industry, the barrier to entry is so low. You can take a weekend, internet survey and call yourself a trainer. So I mean, there is that, and in my opinion, I think that we have, as the leading edge practitioners, we have an obligation to educate and serve and get that message out there, because the general public and the average person doesn't necessarily know. They only know what the norm is. And then once we have that, we have an obligation to teach and to serve and change the way people look at that. Because if we don't change the way people look at that, they do think that, well, all squats are the same. All trainers are the same. The trainer doesn't matter. The one who fits my schedule the best is the best one. Like, no, the best one is the best one, because this movement thing and this exercise thing and this program design thing, this exercise selection thing is so multivariable and so complex that to simply oversimplify it and say that it's not complicated causes more problems and does more damage than it helps by simplifying it. So we have to acknowledge that as a unique movement individual and a unique human, you have complexity, that it absolutely matters what exercises you do. Because again, a really good exercise that is really bad for you is still bad, right? Because is a kettlebell swing good or bad? Completely depends on the person. Because for some people, it's going to be a great fat burning utility, a great glute developer, a great fat loss, whatever. And for some people, it can be the worst exercise we can possibly do, right? No exercise is good or bad. It's only the application and the implementation to a specific person that could be good or bad.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on board today and giving us some insight on how coaching gets done in Erie, Pennsylvania, and how coaching should be done. And
I wish it were done that way in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's mainly done in our four walls, but that's another podcast, right?
That would be No, you guys do an awesome job out there. I learn so much from you all the time. I really appreciate you coming on board and giving my coaches and my clients, my viewers, some insight as to what really goes on in the coaching world and what makes us a little bit different than everybody else.
Well, actually, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. I think part of the way we serve is to do things like this. I hope, it's hard when you can't necessarily demonstrate the things. So I hope I'm able to make sense of the things and make it. I tried not to do too much trainer speak, but I'm not often too good at that. So hopefully it was digestible for the average clientele we serve.
Well, somebody is always working to email me, Facebook messages, to walk through my door. My clients can ask me any questions, anything that you talked about, and I'm more than happy to show them and explain it to them. And maybe I'll throw a few videos up there in the next week or so. Some of the stuff we talked about.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. I appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
You as well, man. Thank you.
Thanks. Look for us again next Tuesday at 3:30 for more insight on how to get fit, feel young, a little better. Have a great night.